This sitting is resumed. Honourable Member for St. Philip North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I move on through you, Mr. Speaker, I would like to acknowledge the members of the Autism Association and congratulate them on the work that they have done over the years. I know one or two people that are members or that have children that suffer from this. It's not a disease, but this condition, if I may say. Mr. Speaker, I begin by throwing out some names to you. Dan Aykroyd, actor. Susan Doyle of Britain's Got Talent fame, singer. Jerry Seinfeld, actor. Question mark against Emily Dickinson, writer. Bill Gates, question mark. All of these individuals have been associated whether by personal admission of diagnosis of autism or on the spectrum, or some have been purported to given symptoms that they exhibited. I want to also say that this is the time, especially now that we are doing this for the Autism Society, that we rid ourselves of the stigma of having a disability. I don't know that there's any member in the House or on the outside of the House that can claim that they have no disability whatsoever, whether it be temporary or permanent, whether it was past or to come. I myself have some issues getting up the steps here because of something I'm suffering from right now. Hopefully it will be temporary. But none of us can really claim to have no disability in life. And I think it's time that we get past, and hopefully this bill would lead to that, the stigma associated with certain diseases and certain conditions. I want to mention, on my research, I was looking at the cost of treating, be it from diagnosis to addressing issues to long-term care for the autistic members of our society. I found none, of course, for Barbados, but in the US, the costs are anywhere between 1.4 to 2.4 million US dollars for an individual for lifelong care. And it is here that I always put a plug for data. We need the data, we need the data, we need the data, so that we can move on as a country, as a society, in knowing how to deal with it. The rates vary. We do not know our rates as it stands in Barbados, not officially. But worldwide, the rates vary from anywhere from 1 in 66 to 1 in 99 people per country, for instance. It should be noted that the spectrum, the autism spectrum, also has a lot of attendant comorbidities. That term became familiar to us during the COVID time. So these are things we need to discover. What are comorbidities, for instance, attention deficit disorder, so on, related to autism. We need to do work as a country on the genetics of it, the association of it. There's anecdotal evidence from some of our doctors, including the pediatrician, that suggests that the numbers are rising, and rising quite quickly in our island in terms of autism. And the importance of research, we can almost link it as an example. We remember way back when one of the so-called esteemed doctors of maybe not my time, but maybe a little before my time, basically accused the vaccination, MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, for causing the symptoms of autism. And since then, the research has dispelled that myth, and maybe perhaps things like that are giving us some trouble in terms of getting the country back on track with the vaccination schedule. But research has revealed a lot of these things. In Barbados, we have issues in terms of timely diagnosis for autism, which is extremely important. I am told that if we can get it before 2 years old or 2 years old, you would derive the greatest benefits for our children. Yes, there is the A.C. Graham Center, but largely the diagnoses of these individuals are private, through the private sector, and their costs can range, I believe, upwards of 3,000 Barbados dollars per child for diagnosis. There was made mention of the Claude Graham Center, Albert Claude Graham Center. Yes, they're doing wonderful work, But one of the drawbacks of the center is the staffing is limited, and they rely heavily on volunteerism to complement the staff. The Ministry of Health at present funds the AC Graham Center, but I am at the point where I think the discussion needs to be had with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health in terms of getting an input, whether it be funding or help with the syllabuses, some people say, of the AC Graham Center. We take care of the health issues as best we can, but the education arm of it needs a little help on that end, including funding. Their waiting list is extremely long. I had the misfortune of speaking to a young lady, but the misfortune of hearing that she has been on the list for her child for a very long time. And I may say, I knew this child from maybe about 4 years old or less, and he's now close to 20 if he hasn't passed that time. So these are some of the constraints that we are facing at the AC Graham Center. There's also only one speech therapist that works at the AC Graham Center, but not only that, she works for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. She attends clinics in all of our polyclinics, or most of the polyclinics. So you can see for an island-wide basis, one speech therapist is certainly inadequate. The Ministry of Health we have put in an ask really for another speech therapist, but in my mind, even that is inadequate. So these are things that we have to look at and address. From an education point of view, and maybe this is the point to apply to philanthropy, the philanthropic arm of society. They need equipment for their special rooms for the autistic, and the members of the society, the association here would know what I'm referring to. Quiet rooms, room for stimulation or decreased stimulation. A lot of these areas are lacking in the AC Graham Center, and I'm hoping by the time I'm finishing my speech that some part of the public sector may come forward and offer to outfit or to help us outfit the AC Graham Center. I am glad that we as a government have seen it fit to house the members of the association, and that can only lead to more positive outreach to them. We need help with the public outreach, which I'm sure the Ministry of Health is willing to help, and other agencies, other ministries, public outreach, which will include educating parents, educating employers. That is an important one. And of course, teachers. Teachers are, as I would say, are the front line in most cases, whether it be primary or nursery school. In most cases, to discover that something is not quite right or not quite normal or not quite typical of a child, a student. And I think it would air well to educate teachers, basic education in terms of how to identify possible autistic students, in terms of how to refer them to the relevant agencies despite the waiting list. And like everybody basically that spoke today, we have brilliant children who are deemed on the spectrum, Asperger's syndrome, for instance. And the Honourable Member for St. James North mentioned a Harrison College student. And while I am happy that he mentioned that, there are other students that should not be a benchmark on the brilliance of some of these children or the adequacy of some of these children. Harrison College is just one agency. There are many other schools that I'm sure can boast that they have had students that are on the spectrum that have done well. And we need to get away from using the older secondary schools as benchmarks for how we assess students in terms of their abilities and what they can be trained to do. So I understand that part as well. And that is, we know about, as I mentioned, a few names, actors, we know artists, a lot of children. I know one that is actually in my neighborhood that is brilliant at art. And sometimes we need to put things in place to hone these abilities and to see that they are supported, basically. We have to consider, and I say here now, help for parents on the governmental end. Right now I have, and I will say a patient, a neighbor as well, whose son, she's a young lady, younger than I am, I'm calling myself young, but younger than I am, who has an autistic child, older child, I think maybe at the end of teenage years now. But she is not, although she has appealed, has not been able to get assistance from welfare department. I've been told by several parents with other illnesses to basically NIS has told them they need to support their children till whoever dies first, basically. And our normal families expect that you have a child, they grow up, they move out, they get a job for themselves, and we don't ever think of supporting an adult child for the rest of our lives or their lives. I think we need to look at that in terms of supporting some of these parents, if not all of them, financially, but not only financially. A lot of these parents obviously have to work. And institutions for daycare or night care, depending on how you work, we need to look at those so that when a mother, and oftentimes they're single parents, when a mother has to work in the day or at night, that she is safe in the provision, that knowing that her child is somewhere safe, well outfitted, with trained staff in how to deal with autistic children or individuals, if I may say. And parents really and truly have genuine concerns. They are concerned about what happens to them if they get ill. That might require some nights or weeks in the hospital. And a greater concern is if they die, what is to become of their charges? That is almost every parent that I have met with a child in this or other illnesses, long-term, lifelong illnesses or disabilities. One of the main concerns is if I die, what will happen to my child? And these are things in the near future we need to look at and put things in place that parents will not, they will always have the worry, but parents will have less of a worry. And then the Honourable Member for St. James North also mentioned insurance. I don't think we get, as a people, we do not get enough out of our insurance companies. Sometimes the coverage is non-existent because they rate you, and I'm sure people would agree, they rate you, even regular illnesses. I have people in the hospital right now or elsewhere outside getting, for instance, this is on a side, dialysis treatment. The insurance covers for them, but at 2 to 3 years, they stop. So your choice is find the money to pay for it or die. So insurance companies need to be educated, one, and to get on board in buttressing these parents and these children in times of illness or in times of their parents' illness. And I agree with him wholeheartedly on that part of it. Gone are the days where we need to hide away, and I know it's still being done, hide away our children with disabilities. I have met, not autistic in this case, but I have met in my practice a few Down syndrome individuals. They're adults now. But I could see that if they were given the right attention, the right schooling, they could actually hold on jobs, meaningful jobs. I had one that used to visit me in my office every day. And he would always ask me for some money for a co-op. I know NCDs, but this is before all of that. To go to this shop, and he would go to this shop and purchase a co-op on his own. He could speak to you, sometimes like a pirate, but he was high-functioning enough that if he was given the opportunity, if we could get over the stigma and get parents to understand that these children are children and they need the love and the care and the attention like everybody else, and that it's not worth hiding them away, he would have probably been holding a job right now, a meaningful job. We need to take charge, as I mentioned earlier, early diagnosis, whether it be by opening some posts for psychologists/psychiatrists, putting things in place to offset the $3,000 cost of diagnosis, because as I said earlier, it's important to diagnose early and intervene at an early stage, although some diagnoses come later, but it's important. Parents know, especially if they had another child, that something is not quite right. But they don't have the resources for diagnosis. Many of them, yes, they're on the list for ACGRAM, and they really can't afford it. To get these children diagnosed, that intervention can happen, and that teachers can be informed as to what is happening with the child, that they can put things in place to make it easier for educating that child, even if it's just life skills. There needs to be discussions with the employers and educational sessions too, because on a larger scale overseas, a lot of autistic individuals on whichever end of the spectrum are holding gainful employment. I do not think, in fact, I almost know that we have not reached that. We need to encourage employers to entertain, once we could get all things equal, to entertain and interview and hire individuals with autism and other genetic illnesses that are quite capable of doing a meaningful job. But that will also mean that they need to get on board with outfitting the workplaces in terms of the physical infrastructure. You need quiet rooms in such cases, with decreased stimulation, for instance, so that people can work. We all know that things like sound, visual triggers, and auditory triggers are sometimes the things that set off, quote unquote, set off some of these children and adults. So conversations have to happen with the sensory-friendly environments within workplaces. And I always mention this, things like a staggered work environment where you can adjust the flexible working hours, and that would include both parents and the individual who is working, to accommodate, basically to keep them going on a line that they will be productive workers. And for parents, so that they know they can be at home, if they can work at home. If it's one thing that COVID had taught us, is that working from home is often very productive. And we need to get parents or caregivers, give them permission basically to work at home once they're productive, that they can keep an eye on the child. And the vision in a lot of people's head is that the autistic child is disruptive and noisy, and you can't work from home, and this is not true. The ones I know sit in my office quite happily. They might find something to tickle at, but these are individuals that would allow a parent to work. So workplaces, including governmental workplaces, need to look at that, a staggered schedule so that parents can be a part of their child's life and be productive employees at the same time. Not much more to say, Mr. Speaker, but the last thing I want to say is that we need to include autistic individuals in the decision making, especially in this case. The Honourable Member mentioned Harrison College students, and yes, others have mentioned that age group. We need to include those high-functioning ones in our decision making. As they say, nothing about us without us. So with those few words, I just want to say that I support the bill. Congratulations to society. I expect good things. I know there will be good things, and don't be afraid to ask for help, at least from the Ministry of Health. With that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by congratulating the association and the volunteers who may not be here, but who work diligently to assist with this very special group of Barbadians, and also to salute all those who work with those with special needs, because I think it takes a special heart and mind to care in those circumstances. I also want to heartily congratulate the Honourable Member for St. James North, who has so diligently worked with the Commission to mobilize this country around the issues of the disabled. I think he's done an excellent job, and the output or end product is going to transform this country if we respond to the recommendations that will come in that report. And I want to salute him for that excellent work. As I listen to my colleagues speak about this area of special needs, the area of autism and other challenges that people experience in their lives, one of the things that stood out for me is how do we respond as individuals to people who are different to us? How do we prepare a society to be inclusive of all of its members, regardless of differences? And it forced me to go back in my own life to see what were the preparations that occurred in my life to help me to relate to people who are differently abled. And my first experience was at the polio center, was just outside Stowe Primary School, between Springer Memorial and Stowe Primary School. Their bath, their pool for swimming was there. And periodically, it would be closed most of the time. We never got a chance to go in, but a bus would come and the children would get out and go into the establishment and do their swimming and their exercise. And we would see them when they were going in and when they were coming out. And at that age, I was in primary school, and it made me curious about people who were differently abled. The next occurrence that I had experienced was when I was at foundation school. One of the things, our head teacher at that time, she had a child that was specially challenged as well, and so she was sensitive to the issue. And one of the things that she had put in place was that some classes would go down to the geriatric, the district hospital, where you had a lot of elderly people, people who were disabled or challenged and were unable to manage their lives. And I remember the impact that it had on us as school children. We were probably about 12 or 13 years old at the time. And because many of the children did not have exposure to people who had these types of challenges, they recoiled. They were, oh my goodness, oh, I didn't like that, oh. And I realized that in truth and in fact, we needed to have done better preparation, and we need to do preparation from young to get our society to be able to engage and include people who are differently able. The next experience was with the Challoner School. Our girl guide mistress, she's passed now, she took us there for camp for a week. And this is where we saw people who were challenged, people who had physical and mental challenges. And again, because we were not prepared, there was the staring, there was the And what it meant again was that as we were going along in our lives, that enough adequate preparation for being receptive and accepting of others who are different had not occurred. And during that period would have been a period when you had a lot of hiding, where parents would not bring their children out. They would hide them away and so on. So the society was not accustomed. And so you would get the jeering from sometimes young men, you know, teasing and jeering at people who were challenged. And that must have been an awful experience for our Special Barbadians to go through. So my focus today is on how are we going to build an inclusive society that understands, accepts, and embraces people who are differently abled. And one of the things that I feel would be important, the first thing, and very early, is to begin to explain difference. To be able to help people to understand what creates difference and how we are to relate to it. And I feel very strongly that this is something that we can inculcate into everyday life. We can inculcate it in education. A simple thing, Mr. Speaker, all of us in economics, we learn about the bell curve. The bell curve tells us that most people will fall in that huge middle ground and will be pretty much like each other. But there are always going to be a small percentage that are going to lie outside of that curve, who will be differently able to the rest of us. So that when we're teaching mathematics, we should include, because one of the problems that we have, sir, my nephew touched on it, that we teach things, but without linking them to everyday life. how does understanding the bell curve help you to learn to manage difference? When you're teaching me home economics, how are you teaching me about not only preparing food for myself, but if there are people who have special needs in my family? If I'm doing music, if I'm learning geography, if I'm doing biology, all of these are wonderful opportunities in which to help people to appreciate difference and to learn how to respond to that difference. So explaining is important. The second thing I think that's very critical for this, if we're going to grow an inclusive society, is that we have to encourage visiting and mixing. And this means being very deliberate about what it is we want our children to know and understand. And therefore, designing visits to places where they can interact with people who are different, but giving them the necessary psychological preparation before they do. Because everybody is not fortunate to have an experience that I had. In my class in foundation in first form, we had a student who suffered with polio. And at first, the children stared. But when they got to know her, she was bright. She was one of the brightest children in the class, but she could not spell for toffee. Could not spell. It didn't matter what you tried, she couldn't spell. But she was so bright. And people after a while forgot about the disability and focused on her as a person. But then they were thoughtful about her. When we were walking on uneven steps, careful here. Mind you don't fall there. When she was doing games and she wanted to do everything everybody was doing, they encouraged her, they cheered her on, and they made it easy for her to participate. And what that did, that helped to train us. But every child doesn't have that experience or that opportunity that we had to be able to have our values and our minds and our emotions change by engagement. So therefore, we have to build those opportunities in with visits and the opportunity to mix. This also leads us to two other things that we need to do. Because as we help people in society to engage, what we're doing is reshaping their values. What we're doing is we are helping them to allow for a world that is bigger and greater than our own experience and to allow others to participate and play. And it helps us to celebrate all of our society, regardless of what the particular strength or ability is, that everybody has a value that they bring to Barbadian life and they should be facilitated and allowed to engage. And so this is why I'm so pleased that we are doing this bill today to provide the society with the opportunity to have a property that they can work with and use. And again, like my other colleagues, I pray that others will step forward to help with the funding to allow them to do this very important work for Barbadian citizens. But if we truly care about providing funding, this funding is going to have to be sustained. So while donations and so on are important, more important is the growth of our economy so that our government revenues can increase and grow, can provide jobs and opportunities in the society, so that both the society, the parents, and government can set aside the resources that will help to support our differently abled people. And therefore, growing our economy is going to be important. But there's some areas of breach. And this has affected me as an MP in St. James South. One of the areas that distressed me, and I believe the Honourable Member for St. Michael South mentioned it, that between the ages of 15 and when you get to senior citizen stage, there is no institutional care for a person who is disabled. What that means is that person can't be in an orphanage, they can't be at the child care board because they're older than that age. They're not old enough to be in the geriatric hospital. So what happens to them? As an MP, I had that experience. where there was one of my constituents who was disabled, and because there was no provision for him and his family struggled to meet his needs in a very small, cramped house that made it difficult, and the burden became too much for that family. His main caregiver died, and then all was lost at that point. Eventually, because he became very ill, he was hospitalized, and shortly thereafter, he died. But as a society, we were unable to respond to his need because there was a breach, and that breach, Mr. Speaker, needs to be filled. There's another breach. In my constituency, I have a gentleman who is blind, and he's unable to take care of himself. He has an only child, a daughter, and this daughter is dedicated to the needs of her father. But what does that mean for her and her life? It means that she's unable to work. And though she's a young person in her mid-30s, early 40s, she would have spent years of her life caring for him and has years more to go. What does that mean? That she has been unable to advance her education, to get job experience, and therefore to be able to move herself forward in terms of her earning power. What is going to happen to her after her father dies? She will not be able to support herself because she will not be able to enter the workforce. But she has to make that choice because it is her father and there's no one else to care for him. This is a breach in the fabric of our care, and we have to find ways to be able to assist caregivers to be able to earn while they're performing this very important role of caring for our differently abled and challenged persons. Then there's the breach that was recently mentioned by the Honourable Member for St. Philip North. Because again, I have a family in St. James South that have a mentally challenged child. And the one fear in the mind of the parents is that they will die and what will happen to their son. So they have committed themselves to working harder and longer, because they not only have to provide for him while he is in their care, they have to find a way to provide for his care after they're gone. So they struggle to make this happen. And therefore, this is a breach within the fabric of care that we need to find a way to fill. Then, what do we need to do? And I think it was ably said by the Honourable Member for St. Philip North. We have to prepare an entire society to be able to engage in care for those who are differently able, those who are challenged. And one of the things that we have to do is to help people to respect differences, to accept those differences, and to understand the primacy of the value of the human being. And this means not only our teachers, it's our healthcare workers, not just teachers and healthcare workers, it's your transport workers. It is people who are giving services to the wide community to make sure that we train and expose all of them, as to how to relate to, understand the needs of, and prepare to give them the additional service which they need. So there's another group that I am particularly concerned about in terms of their preparation, and that is parents. Because I too have encountered parents who, when faced with the fact that they have produced a child that is challenged and differently able, the shock, the pain, the embarrassment, the sense of something was wrong with me that this has occurred, some parents never overcome the pain of the experience of the birth of their differently abled child. And in some cases, there are parents who have run away, abandoned those children. There are some who remain in the relationship, but more likely than not, it's the mother who has to carry the burden, and sometimes the fathers distance themselves completely from that child because they cannot cope emotionally with the fact that I have produced, and they're wondering if it was something in their biology that created it. That is probably one of the most painful things for people to live with and confront if they have not been given the support, the counseling, the training beforehand. If we'd had that full training in the society beforehand, they would be better able to manage when a child presents itself as differently able as coming from them. But what we must do is provide counseling support and create a network group that works around those families and help them. And it's not just the mother and father, because in order for that child to have the best care, their whole of family network needs to be triggered. It means that grandparents have to be prepared. It means aunts and uncles have to be prepared. Because one of the challenges when I speak with my families who have the gift of a special needs child is, no, I can't leave them there because that person won't be able to cope. And so they don't have anyone to hand off when they need some space. So therefore you need the family network to be trained, prepared, and supported in order to give the kind of care that we feel our special Barbadians should have. And therefore I want to be able to recommend that that is something that we work towards. Now, where can we start with that sensitization? I want to suggest that there are a number of groups that can actually start working because we're behind the eighth ball on this. And so we have to accelerate how we're going to engage the broader Barbadian society in building that sensitivity, etc. For me, the constituency and the MP in an area, that's a good place to start, because I will tell you this, if it's one thing MPs know what is going on in the homes in their constituency. They know where those people are, even the ones who are hiding. Even the ones who are hiding. And therefore, we are in a position to be able to start and put on programs. We are in a position to be able to report to the authorities that this family here will need some help. But we can start that process by being able to put on sensitization workshops, organize it, work with the associations, work with the National Disabilities Unit, whichever is the group, and start and put on something in our constituencies. Secondly, our churches. There is no harm in a church taking a month and using that month to teach and expose and sensitize their congregation to the needs of our special needs people and building out programs of support. Our schools, and let me suggest that the Give Back program is an excellent place to start and sensitize some of our young people to be able to engage this community, to give of their skills to help the associations, to give of their learning to help the association to manage and function, raise funds, etc., and at the same time get immersed in giving back and engaging our differently abled people. And then, of course, we have the workplace. And this is where you look at HRMAB, the Human Resources Association of Barbados, Human Resources Management Association of Barbados, that the HR practitioners should work at helping to build an inclusive society. Why? Because you need to bring differently able people into the workplace, but differently able people will also be your customers and consumers. How are you going to sensitize your population that works within your business space to be able to engage this group in a sensitive, caring, and loving way? I believe that if we were to trigger all these different points and begin to put in the sensitization and the training that what we will be doing across Barbados is seasoning up the country with kindness, with care, with a sense of responsibility, and a sense of value for each other. Because if your heart becomes triggered by concern for someone who is challenged, and you give of yourself to that person, I think it would be difficult for you to take up a gun and go and shoot somebody, because you would have triggered within yourself a sense of the value of the human being. So there might even be a very powerful tool in training us not to be shooting at each other. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to end there and to commend the bill and to say to the association, and again to Edmund, thank you so much for taking up this challenge within our country. And I trust that Barbados and all the various elements of Barbados will take up the challenge to reach out and create a space in which our differently abled people will feel what is necessary. They need to feel safe. They need to feel acceptance. They need to feel inclusion. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. Philip, rest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this resolution to lease the land at the garrison to the Autism Association. And I have listened to many over the years, and certainly over the time since I have also worked as Minister of Responsibility for Education. And what I have seen is that many people see autism as, in many cases, only as a limit to learning. And today, sir, I would like to invite this Honourable House, the Autism Society Association, and the parents of those persons with autism to become partners with our Ministry of Education as we try to use the opportunity we have now to better understand, to better empathize, and to better include people with autism. Autism is not just a limit to learning. I think it brings us tremendous opportunity to understand, to include, and to ensure that we are operating with empathy. Sir, when we look at this global statistics, the World Health Organization in its March fact sheet tells us that 1 out of every 100 births, there is some part of autism on the spectrum. Sir, that is interesting in 2023, according to the World Health Organization, but only 7 years ago, that same number was 1 in 160. In fact, they're saying that the autism spectrum disorder is the fastest growing serious developmental disability in the world. That is the source. And I contextualize it there, Mr. Speaker, because I want to go to what we are seeing in the school system here in Barbados. That same growth is what we are witnessing here in our education system. We have in the last 3 years, and this is just from those who were referred from public schools, 120 children with autism at some level of the spectrum. Sir, these are only the ones who were referred to our Student Support Services unit. There are many who were not referred. And that does not include the number from the private school system. The reality is, sir, that autism forms part of the special education needs that students who have special educational needs. And the number I just said, sir, represents about 25% of students with special educational needs that we see as part of the ministry. And that number is growing. And so, sir, This number, if you want to see how much it's grown, if 20 years ago you had taken a look at the numbers in our education system, that 120 represents about a 300% increase over the numbers about 20 years ago. And so we are seeing that not just is this autism spectrum disorder growing on a global level, we are seeing locally it manifesting through our education system. But what does that mean, sir? I said, sir, that I choose not to look at the limitations of autism, but I choose to see what opportunities those individuals on the autism spectrum, what opportunities they present to us. Sir, I see this as an opportunity for the education system to get into strengths-based approach to how we educate. Every single student, whether they are on the autism spectrum or have some other special educational need, from the gifted to those who are challenged, we have the opportunity, sir, to use a strengths-based approach to the way we educate, where we're not looking for the weaknesses, but we're looking for what are your strengths, and then we are able to educate you using your strengths. Another opportunity I see that this presents for us, Mr. Speaker, is specialized support. Whether that is through speech therapy, or it's through occupational therapy, or it's through other special supports that would be required. This is an opportunity for us to be able to see what other types of specialized support is needed and where is the gap between what is needed and what we now provide as a country in support of those with special education needs, including those with autism. A third opportunity that I see this present, Mr. Speaker, is that to be inclusive. Much of the research that we are seeing around the world is telling us that when we have students with special educational needs, to the extent that we can, include and integrate them in our regular education system, and then make the proper accommodations to be able to work with them, because we see that they get better results through an inclusive approach. Now, not every single child on the autism spectrum will necessarily be able to be integrated into the mainstream school system. However, those that can, it is in our interest to seek to integrate them, not only from an educational perspective, but also in order to teach our school communities how to be more accepting and how to appreciate diversity, whether it is that neurodiversity that autism represents, or it is all types of diversity in every different form. A fourth opportunity that I see, Mr. Speaker, is for us to be able to use technology in a meaningful way to be assistive. It's interesting, just a couple of days ago, I was having a conversation with one of the persons responsible for IT in our schools, and we were looking at the use of artificial intelligence in helping us to better educate students with special educational needs. And so we have the opportunity here, sir, to move beyond seeing autism as some limit to learning, and to shift the way we think and see it as where are the opportunities for us to take this experience in education. Sir, what is interesting is that you will find that many persons with autism are highly intelligent, pay close attention to detail, and are often out-of-the-box thinkers. And it is for that reason that a number of the major tech companies have indeed set up special programs for the employment of persons who are at places on that autistic spectrum. And sir, what often happens is that we will see that there's a limitation in how persons with some form of autism, how they will communicate, or how they will socialize, or that they have certain challenges, sensory challenges, whether things are too loud and how they're disturbed. We can point to all those things, but again, sir, I say let us shift from the limitation and go to the opportunity. What does that do for us, for example? One of the things we reckon don't do is better preparation for interviews of students who are leaving at some point on the autism at some point in the autism spectrum where we are able to recognize what some of their challenges are and then be able to better prepare them for interviews. Understand that there is a way for us to educate persons to say, avoid abstract language. Speak in shorter, crisper sentences. Give more instructions so that we are now better able to create the environments that will allow persons on the autism spectrum to have greater success. And when I say success, education has to have an outcome for the student. And we expect that outcome to be that they get a job, that they're able to go on to higher education, or they're able to open a business, and they're able to function independently as much as possible in life. And if we are to improve the outcomes of students who go through the education system who are part of that, who are on that autism spectrum, we need to be able to not only educate the teachers and the parents and the communities, but we also need to educate those in the work world on how best you may be able to help persons on the autism spectrum to unlock their potential and be able to be contributing citizens in this country. Certainly, as part of our education transformation agenda, we are considering the tremendous work that we need to do for students who have special educational needs. I will say quite honestly, students with special education needs have traditionally and still are today underserved by the education system we have. Unfortunately, but we are working on it. We do not have enough diagnostic testing capacity or resources to do the type of diagnostic testing that is required, because our interventions for students with special educational needs has to be evidence-based. How often, Mr. Speaker, you in your world have heard that, well, this child cannot learn. And when we check, it was not a learning challenge, it was an instructional challenge. So it wasn't that the child could not learn, but it was the teaching methods that were not quite suited to the way that child learned, the pace at which that child learned. It didn't recognize that child's strengths or the different types of intelligences that child had. And so the approach that we have to take is not just one from how do we diagnose what is happening with the child and seek to make the intervention with the child. That is fundamental, and we need additional resources so to do. We also need to look at it from the instructional quality side and ensure that we have trained teachers in how to work more effectively with children who have special educational needs, including those who are included in our classrooms who are on the autism spectrum. That, I am happy to say, has already started with us seeking to train our teachers. Not only is Erdeston offering more in terms of training teachers who can be special education teachers, they've also sought to include a special education component as part of whatever course you take in teaching, so that it is not just about those who will specialize, but it is also those who can teach in an environment where there are differentiated learning styles and where you need differentiated instruction to teach those in a different way, the students in a different way. And so we've started on the process because we understand that training of teachers is going to be critical. In addition, we know that students with special education needs, including those on the autism spectrum, will require individual education plans because they have specialized needs. So one size fits all will not be working for them. Not all teachers as well know how to develop those individual education plans, the IEPs. And so that has also to be a way in which we bring additional training and understanding to this experience. Sir, not only then are we to put the right supports in place for the children, and are we seeking, as we've started to do, to train the teachers, there are specialized and customized spaces for those students with special educational needs, and including those with autism. Not all spaces are suitable to all children needing special needs, and we now have to tailor-make those spaces. And I understand that part of what will happen in this project that will benefit from this resolution will be that there will be special places created. Those tailor-made, customized spaces that would be suitable for persons with autism, and I commend them, because we as a ministry need to be able to do more of that within our own system. But more fundamentally, we cannot as a government do it all ourselves. There are a number of nonprofit organizations, there are a number of private organizations who have created customized spaces for persons with special needs. And the government now has to continue to support those efforts, because the government cannot do it alone, and we cannot do it all. There are some schools here that cater to special needs where the government will pay some of the salaries of the teachers, where we have given a subvention to the particular organization. What we now need to do is to audit the support that we are giving for special education needs, including for those on the autism spectrum, and determine what more do we need to do in collaboration with partners to be able to provide adequate access for all of our special needs students. Sir, transportation continues to be a challenge for those students we have with special needs as well. It is a challenge generally for children going to school. And I know that the ministry responsible for transport and works, and of course the Barbados Transport Board, has been having communications with us and conversations with us about how best we might at some point reach a dedicated system for transportation for schools. But right now, sir, in my constituency in St. Philip West, there are two families I know of who would happily like to have their children go to some of the specialist schools. However, the transportation issue for those persons with special needs, that transportation system is not adequate either. And we are now looking to see how we as a community might be able to offer some support in that regard. But with them not being able to get to schools, it means that their access to education, their access to that right, is suffering, it's at risk. And so part of what we need to do as we move towards a transformed education system is not only to look at the pedagogy, is not only to look at the instructional quality, is not only to look at the customized spaces for persons with disability, it's not only for us to look at the opportunities, many of which I have already listed, for us to be able to be more inclusive, for us to be more empathetic, and for us to be more understanding, sir. We also have to find ways to make sure that even though the opportunities are available, we are able to give the students with special education needs access. Because it may be available, but not accessible. And that has to be a part of the considerations that go forward, sir. I have to say to you, sir, that as I call for greater partnership between the Autism Association and others to work with our Ministry of Education to unlock the potential within every autistic child. Sir, we know that we have a lot of work to do. We have more funding to secure, we have more spaces to secure, and we have to look at programming in a more holistic way. And I am told that some of the space of the project that will benefit from this resolution would be towards providing some basic life skills to persons with autism. And I trust that that will continue to be something that is celebrated. I remember while this school does not always cater to only persons with autism or in a significant way, but it caters to students with special needs. The Derek Smith School has done tremendous work for a number of our students and young adults with special education needs. And I know that recently they started to offer the NVQs and the CVQ, technical and vocational. And you have students now who are graduating with certification and with the ability to step into the work world, and many have. And so I hope that that will continue to inspire us as a country to not just see special education needs as something that needs to be addressed as a learning deficit, but that indeed we're able to treat it as something that will take us to a higher height within ourselves and our psyche as a country to allow us to serve all of our children equitably and create a bright future for every child. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this piece of legislation before the House out of a recognition that organizations like the Autism Association of Barbados, some of whose members are here with us today, a recognition that, and I've said this to officers in my ministry, and I say it within the context of being the minister responsible for the ministry that is charged with looking after, in a general sense, the third sector. The third sector meaning the non-public sector, non-private sector. So civil society organizations, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, that group of organizations. And I say very often to my officers that there is no amount of money that you can pay to a person and be able to replicate the passion that you find in organizations like the Autism Association of Barbados and other NGOs and CBOs. And it is, I don't want to use the word simply, but I don't have a great facility with words, so I got to use simply. It is probably simply because those who are in these organizations, and they're usually pretty small organizations, but those persons are touched by the issues that they advocate for. And those who are familiar with scripture know that very often when we speak about the fact that Christ is our perfect example, we use the word and we speak to the fact that he was touched with our infirmities. And we use that because when one is touched, when one is impacted, the recognition, the passion, the everything that comes and that drives action is one that cannot be replicated outside of that. And so, from the perspective of third sector organizations broadly, including the Autism Association of Barbados, we recognize as a government that this sector and these organizations are fully to be considered as partners in national development. There is no government, in spite of resolutions like the one that we are debating today, there are no governments anywhere in the world with all the abundant resources that there's no government that is, if you're trying to get the grammar correct, but there's no government that is capable of addressing all the needs that need to be addressed in a country. And that is something that a government that is realistic has to come to grips with. This government that I have the honor and privilege to be a part of is a government that recognizes that, and also a government that understands that we can fulfill the mandate, even though we can't do it directly. We can fulfill the mandate if we partner with the organizations that can get into areas that governmental bureaucracy does not easily allow us to get to. And so we say that, for example, if I move away from the Autism Association of Barbados, the faith-based organizations that get into areas that we call the nooks and crannies, that know a lot of the realities deep in communities, a lot of health-related NGOs that know where the needs are. And in order for a government, well, in order for a country to develop and not to have skewed and lopsided development, as the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South referred to earlier today, it means that we have to partner with these organizations. And this resolution today is a resolution that comes out of that philosophy. A resolution that comes out of the thinking that says, while we are not able to address every single need, as a government, we have a primary responsibility to be a facilitator. And so by putting the Autism Association of Barbados in this particular context in possession of a facility, well, of a property, that goes a long way in allowing the association to be able to do what it really wants to do, and that is to address the real needs of persons who are on the autism spectrum. Now, this government, in terms of what we do for third sector organizations, and I'm saying this careful not to give the impression that this is an exercise of patting ourselves on the back. It is not so. We also recognize, though, that we have a responsibility to remind not the Autism Association of Barbados, but Barbadians generally, of what this government's philosophy is, what it is doing, and also what it has done. And as a government during the pandemic, for example, we were careful, even as we met to work through how to respond to the pandemic. We were careful to recognize that the third sector had special accommodations that needed to be made. And so as we worked through how to allow movement, limited though it was, government segregated businesses, third sector organizations, so that there was special attention given to how we would facilitate movement by third sector organizations. So the provision of passes, for example, was looked at separately because we recognize that these organizations are important and need to be facilitated. And so we took those requests, we did not lump them with every other request. We knew that special attention needed to be given, and that is what we did during the pandemic period. An example of our perspective as it relates to including third sector organizations, those organizations that are partners in development, addressing particular areas of need. As a government, we have also recognized some other things. One is that many of our third sector organizations, because of their size, in some cases because of how they developed, have some limitations. And all the limitations, Mr. Speaker, are not financial limitations. Some are limitations with respect to how to manage an organization. I know from when I was a youngster, and I had the privilege of listening to my dad explain some things, so that one of our neighbors passed from cancer. So I was a little boy at the time. I would have been in the 70s. And the gentleman's widow, coming out of that experience, and this is probably my first experience with an NGO outside of a faith-based organization. That gentleman's widow started what is now known as the Barbados Cancer Society. And if I may call her name, the late Dr. Dorothy Cook Johnson, who was a resident of Rose Hill, the same district where I grew up. As a matter of fact, where I now live is on a piece of property that my dad purchased from her when she left Rose Hill. But an organization that starts with a single individual with a large mandate needs assistance. Assistance in financial record keeping, assistance in how to make sure that what you're doing aligns itself with any legislation in the country. We call it governance and financial capacity. And so as a government, what we have been doing over the past, even during the COVID period, but to a lesser extent, but over the past, say, 5 years, 4.5 years, we have been providing that capacity building for many organizations in the civil society sector, in the third sector. We've had capacity building sessions with respect to proposal writing. We have partnered with organizations to provide capacity building with respect to financial record keeping. And we have, in more recent times, the last one would have been just a couple of months ago, partnered with the Aspire Foundation to have these programs that recognize that these important organizations just sometimes need the support that gives them the capacity to be able to step out, to be able to write their proposals, to be able to tap into funding sources, to be able to partner with larger organizations so that they can fulfill their mandate. This government has been intentional in this regard. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honourable Prime Minister, as she outlined portfolio responsibilities in 2018, was careful to indicate that we will have a ministerial portfolio that has a responsibility for the third sector, for the civil society sector. That is a recognition by this government that that sector is important to national development. And I'm happy, Mr. Speaker, to be a part of a government that recognizes that these are not just organizations of people who keep noise over various issues. You know, it is easy for governments sometimes to feel pressured by civil society organizations. And I have heard in the past of governments, both in Barbados and outside of Barbados, having what I call a very unhealthy skepticism about third sector organizations. Third sector organizations have a reputation for holding governments or holding the feet of governments to the proverbial fire. This government is not afraid to have its feet held to the fire because we believe in accountability and we believe in empowering organizations that are designed to help people. We believe in empowering those organizations to be able to fulfill their mandate. Now, within our responsibility, there is also another matter that we're working on. And in this matter, we have not made the strides that we really had planned to by this time. But along with providing capacity building sessions for third sector organizations, there's also the need to create third sector organizations or to facilitate the development of third sector organizations that are financially sustainable. So good governance is good, but Scripture says money answereth all things. There's very little you can do without money. And so financial sustainability is an area that government and my ministry is also concerned about. Government has made a decision at the level of the cabinet to carve out a portion of what we refer to as the renewable energy pie for the third sector. Again, intentional action, not remembering as we were walking down the road, oh shoot, we got to look after these organizations. This government has been intentional in its work for the third sector, for civil society organizations. And so a percentage, as we look at renewable energy, as we look at the climate crisis, and the need to move the country to a sustainable path of development, we recognize that renewable energy represents one of those opportunities that include sustainable development, green jobs, what we in the labor sector would call a just transition, but also opportunity to create financial inflow for civil society organizations. It is a matter that we have been grappling with, that we've been giving thought to, and we have had a number of discussions with the ministry responsible for energy, the energy division of the ministry that is responsible for energy and business, in an effort to be able to make the concept a reality. And we recognize that we are still in the embryonic stages of developing the idea, because the renewable energy pie relates not just to civil society, but public transport, the provision of water. There are a number of entities that are to benefit from the bounty that should accrue from renewable energy. But we have to make that idea into a reality. We have to get to the point where there's actual dollars that reach the intended recipients. And so that is a matter that we're working on, and I take this opportunity to update this chamber and to update the country on that. We've had our most recent meeting it included some civil society organizations. It included some It included some civil society organizations, and it included the Aspire Foundation, and we are working with them to see if we can develop a structure that will allow for us to be able to translate the idea, as I said, into a reality for these organizations. I will also say to this Honourable Chamber, Mr. Speaker, that we have been working on developing a portal for philanthropy in this country. We were kind of well on our way in 2019, preparing for regathering. That was when we intended to launch this portal. And when I say portal, if I may just probably backtrack a little bit, to say that when we speak about the portal, we were talking or are speaking of a facility on the internet that will allow us to indicate to the world the projects that need funding. And many of these projects will be projects coming from civil society organizations. But this portal is, well, conceptually is intended to allow persons who are philanthropic, those who want to give, who want to donate funds, but also their talents, their abilities, their time. It will allow them to be able to see the projects that are available to receive contributions and also actually make those contributions. And we've been working with the ministry responsible for innovation, science and technology. And I also take this opportunity to say to my colleague, the Honourable Member for St. Michael North, that we need some action in this regard. It is taking too long, and it cannot be either by my ministry or his, a situation where it is not seen as a priority. And I'm saying to him, like I'm saying to myself and the officers in my ministry, that this is a matter that needs to come to a conclusion. It has to, because we need the mechanisms that will allow our third sector organizations to be able to fulfill their mandate. We need to be facilitators of the vision of organizations like the Autism Association of Barbados and other organizations that are relatively small, that do not have all of the people resources or all of the financial resources. A government is elected to assist. And as we recognize that we cannot do everything, we have to place significant emphasis on being that facilitating entity, which is what a good government will be. But we've been working on that portal, and we will continue so that it becomes a reality and we are able to be in a position where we can channel the resources, or have the resources channeled. Because I shouldn't say channel the resources. The Honourable Member for the city also knows we are third sector people, and donors don't necessarily like to hear governments talking about channeling resources. And that is why I keep using the term facilitator, because donors are probably justifiably so skeptical of governments. Governments have what is called the consolidated fund. So sometimes you don't know when something goes in the consolidated fund where it ends up. And so donors prefer to work directly with organizations, charitable organizations, and we then become facilitators, even though we develop the construct, the system, the model, and we become the facilitators in that regard. I've said in this Honourable Chamber before that the matter of disability is one that we need to pay particular attention to. I had, during the lunch break, Mr. Speaker, I sat with members of the association, and hearing them speak reminded me, and that's the reason why I started with the scripture of Christ being touched by our infirmities. I remember, and I've said it here before, like I said just now, being part of an experience which allowed me to understand a little better what persons with disabilities go through. This program was called Enter My World. And it was held at the Hilton. I got there, went into the foyer downstairs, and was paired with a lady in a wheelchair. So I sat in a wheelchair. I then followed her, and we wheeled ourselves into one of the smaller conference rooms. Now, Mr. Speaker, I thought that the floor at Hilton was flat until I started to, and then I realized that I got some little areas of gradient. But then you start feeling it in your arms. I went to the rooms are on the right. There's a breezeway that looks straight to the sea. There are some smaller rooms on the right. So we were going in that direction. Mr. Speaker, when you rub your knuckles on a door jamb, you become acutely aware of spaces. And what I found was that I became, after that, very aware of door sizes, very aware of gradients, very aware of what sometimes people call, in my view mistakenly, wheelchair accessible. Because unless you're in a motorized vehicle, some of those places that are considered accessible really are not. But I repeat that just to say that it is sometimes not possible to, well, first of all, if you don't live it, you don't know it. But even to start to understand a little bit, you have either to hear from persons who are living the experience, or in some cases, it would not apply necessarily to persons on the spectrum. But in some areas of disability, you actually have to be in a situation. One of my colleagues was blindfolded. And after about an hour and a half, maybe, he asked for the blindfold, because he was paired with some person who was vision impaired. He asked for the blindfold to be taken off, and he said to us, in all seriousness, that he felt as though he was going mad. Those were his words. Sometimes we don't use those kinds of words, no, but that is what he said. And I think we understand what he meant. He felt as though he was going mad. I say that to say that those who either are living with a disability or are carers of persons with disabilities go through some experiences that we cannot fathom. And beside what we do as a government to facilitate organizations, and through facilitating organizations, assist persons with disabilities, our policy, the legislation that will come, there also has to be, and we have started it through the town hall meetings, but it has to be a consistent public education of the various areas of disability. Because there are many. There are many. And often we think of disability, we think of wheelchairs, or we think of visual. So persons with canes, they're called canes. Canes, right. Or persons in wheelchairs. But there are many other disabilities. And I believe that sometimes we are insensitive, not necessarily because we want to, There are some worthless people out there who will laugh at everything and be insensitive. But there are many persons, I believe, Mr. Speaker, who are insensitive because they just don't know, out of ignorance. And so I remember in the conversation earlier today, thinking that there must have been persons, both my parents were teachers, there might have been persons who were on the spectrum, who my dad, now of blessed memory, may have administered lashes to because he considered the person to be disobedient. I use my dad as opposed to my mom because my father was pretty quick with the strap. Yeah, like the Honourable Member for St. Thomas. But it might have been that the child might have been on the spectrum. Now, Mr. Speaker, I can say that today only because of the education I got during lunch today. And I'm saying that the same way that I learned something today, we need to expose Barbadians to a lot of this information. Now, a lot of us like juicy stuff, you know, whether you're cussing the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South or cussing the minister responsible for NIS, that's what people kind of like to do. But we still, in spite of that, have a responsibility to share information. The associations have that responsibility, but I think government also has a responsibility. As a kind of an umbrella organization in this country, to share this information, maybe we call it in bite-sized pieces, that over time we can sensitize our population to these various areas of disability so that we can have a better understanding. In a meeting last night, the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South spoke to the fact that where he parks, opposite where he parks at the ministry, there are 3 areas designated for persons with disabilities. I had to share with him, because we work in the same building, I park in another area of the car park. And in front of where I park, there are 2 areas designated for persons with disabilities. Government vehicles park there. People park and get out and run into the building from there. The Honourable Member for St. Thomas works in the building too, and she knows. We are, in spite of signage, in spite of all kinds of things, there is still a level of insensitivity. It may or may not, well, it could be callous, or it could be out of ignorance as well. Sometimes a combination. And so, again, another example of why I feel we have to spend some more time and put more effort into sensitizing our population. Persons with disabilities are human beings. First and foremost, human beings. And that is why we use the term persons with disabilities. They are not disabled persons. They are persons who have disabilities. Persons first and foremost. They deserve our respect because they are persons. And Mr. Speaker, there is absolutely no reason why people who were called 1/3 human or 2/3 human should be tolerating individuals looking at other human beings and considering them as less than fully human beings. No descendant of enslaved people should be looking down on anybody who's a human being. As a matter of fact, we don't even, the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South and the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central would not even want us to look down on canines, also known as dogs. They feel very strongly about that. I mean, they want to lock up people who mistreat animals. And that's in place. And if we do that with animals, imagine about people. So we have to be when the extreme happens, we have to be punitive. But before we get to that point, we really have to do some sensitizing and some educating on the matter of how we relate to persons with disabilities. The council, I think it's the council, has the program Fully Accessible Barbados. And that is a program that Barbados must rally behind. I was in a hotel sometime last year, and I saw a piece of equipment. And because I feel very sensitive to these things, it was a seat to use in a public swimming pool. I took a photo of it and almost immediately sent it to the Honourable Member for St. James North. Because our facilities, we have to start ensuring that our facilities allow us to be able to accommodate everybody. We have to. There is no reason why a person with a disability shouldn't be able to enjoy the sea, a swimming pool, a play park. Why? They're human beings. They are human beings, just like us. And so we have to be intentional. As a ministry, we are also very clear, and we supported and still support the council on the matter of employing persons with disabilities. We support there's a program, and I forget now the name of the program, but we encourage employers to make whatever reasonable accommodations are possible. So we understand that it is not always possible, and not every disability can be accommodated. But we appeal to employing organizations to do what they can, what is reasonable, in order to be able to accommodate persons with disabilities, so that these persons can make the contribution that they really want to make to the development of our country. I hired, when I was in the tourism industry some years ago, I hired a young lady. I think it was after the first time I heard about Fully Accessible Barbados. I hired a young lady who could not hear. And Mr. Speaker, she was the most productive housekeeper. Well, let me say, because I see my staff from time to time, so I don't want them to abuse me. She is one of the most productive housekeepers that I ever hired. Because when the others sign up talking, she's working. She's working. She wanted to work. She wasn't forced to work. She wanted to work. She made a contribution to the organization. And I'm saying to employers and employing representatives of employing organizations, we have to accommodate our people. We passed in this honorable chamber a piece of legislation from my ministry, the Employment Prevention of Discrimination Act. In that act, we were very clear to include disability as one of those areas that a person cannot be discriminated against for in terms of employment. Disability is one of those areas. We did that deliberately because we believe, Mr. Speaker, that all human beings in this country, and I didn't say all Barbadians, I said all human beings in this country, because wherever they were born, once they are here, they deserve protection, they deserve opportunity. And that is what this government is about. We make no apologies for it. We support free movement, and the Honourable Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, has mandated that myself and my ministry get back to her on the protections that will attend to persons as they move freely within this region. Because we are part of a Caribbean civilization, and just like we recognize that all persons, including persons with disabilities, are human beings, all persons who are here also ought to be protected. And I include that to say that is our perspective on humanity. That is how we feel about human beings. And Mr. Speaker, the approach as it manifests itself is a work in progress. We have a philosophy. We are doing a number of things, but we haven't yet arrived. But I want to give the assurance to the people of this country that this government will continue on the path of ensuring that human beings are treated as human beings and that persons with disabilities are provided with all the opportunities necessary to allow them to become fulfilled citizens or fulfilled residents of this country, contributing like you or me to our society in whatever area of development that may be. They deserve our support, they deserve our facilitation because they are us. I want, Mr. Speaker, to end with, I'm not going to call it what it is called normally. I prefer to quote the text because some people use a term for it, and many Barbadians, particularly younger people, do not realize that this is a biblical concept. But in both Matthew 7:12 and Luke 6:31, there is recorded the words, treat people, and this is the New American Standard Bible Version, treat people the same way you would want them to treat you. That which we refer to as the golden rule, and I already said why I refrain from calling it the golden rule, because some people believe that somebody, Aristotle or somebody, came up with this. But this is a quote from Jesus. But anyway, once we get that in our heads, our approach to those on the autism spectrum, our approach to persons with disabilities, our approach to people generally will change. If we recognize their essential humanity, and if we make a decision to treat them and to treat to them in the same way that we would want to be treated. Mr. Speaker, I support the resolution before this honorable chamber, and I am obliged to you.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I really rise to pleasantly add my voice to this resolution and to say that this is consistent with the approach that this government has taken and will continue to take to partner with associations and entities in this country to help us bridge the gap in the protection and in the empowerment of our citizens. We recognized many years ago, and I keep saying it, that when we work together, we win the big battles. And if government tries to fight these battles on its own, it's not going to make it. If the NGOs try to win it on their own, they're not going to make it. If the private sector tries to do it or labor tries to do it on its own, they're not going to make it. And there are few things that I hope will come to reflect the tone and theme and beliefs of this government. We've said from the beginning, share the burden, share the bounty. We've said from the beginning, many hands make light work. We've said from the beginning, we win when we work together. And the reality is we could not have won either with respect to saving our currency or indeed dealing with the massive battle of COVID and the pandemic if we did not come together collectively. There are a few difficulties that we've not sufficiently overcome socially as a society. And it therefore requires a renewed partnership, an invigorated partnership. We had the confidence in the Honourable Member for St. James North to be able to ask him to serve and to start the consultative process with respect to a different deal for the disabled and the differently able community. And we recognize that separate from government policy, the volunteerism and participation of individuals and associations is going to be critical in closing the gap and delivering the deal where possible. I cannot imagine what it is like for a parent to have to deal with day in, day out with a child suffering from autism. But I do know that they have the hope, and I do know that there are examples of those who have done it successfully. If we can lighten the burden of those who must carry that weight, then that is our responsibility. I wish that we led a country and a government where money was no option, no issue for us at all. Regrettably, that has not been our condition as a government, having inherited the third most indebted country in the world in terms of per capita. But in spite of that, we have found ways of partnering with entities and associations, developing policies. Today we met with the Barbados Association of Retired Persons, working with them on a number of key initiatives that we would need to be able to have with respect to senior citizens and improving the quality of their life. I anticipate that in the near future, the Hinkson report, which has informed the policy of the Ministry of People Empowerment, will come to this floor. And when that happens in the next few weeks or months, we will be in a position to have a fuller debate on these matters. But I want to salute those persons who volunteer and give their time. Barbados Autism Association, the Barbados Alzheimer's Association, the Heart Foundation. We can go on the Cancer Society. All of these institutions that have been formed to bridge the gap, to be able to allow partnership to strengthen our chances for success in being able to help persons. There is one major project that we have not yet started, and I hope that over the next few years, we are going to be in a position to work in partnership to make it happen. We need a hospice. And I've said over and over, parents and those providing care, they too need a break. You know, when you're in a plane, they tell you immediately, put the oxygen mask on yourself first, even before you give it to the child that is traveling with you or the elderly person that's traveling with you, because they recognize that if you are not fit for purpose, you can't take care of the person who is under your charge. And I therefore hope that we can find partners in the philanthropic community in this country, along with government, along with some of the aged buildings that we have that are just there lying, to be able to have hospice-type facilities for those who just need respite and who need a break, who need to breathe for a week, 2-3 times a year, in order to fight the other 49, 50 weeks of the year. And I think that if we can set that as a collective ambition, it's one of the things that I would wish that this government undertake in partnership with others. And therefore, I say to all of you who are volunteering your time to these organizations, you have our support, you have our respect, and you have our partnership. If I'm not moving as fast as I would like to move, it is because of the varying obligations that we have and the requests that are upon us. When, just after the last election, when the new cabinet was being sworn in, I spoke to the kind of society that I want us to have, and I spoke to the fact that I grew up in a household where my aunt, who is deaf-mute and who has been taken care of, certainly in my family from the time my parents got married in 1964, probably when I was born actually, in 1965, she has effectively lived with us. And we grew up in a household where you could not leave her at home alone. So as young teenagers when you want to go on hot-footed with all of the rest of your friends, we knew that one of the three of us who were older had to be able to stay at home if no one else was going to be there. You learn responsibility straight off. I very often reflect on the fact that as a young married couple, my father could have said, not me, because both of our parents were alive, and go with them. Over the course of time, she's been with them. She's still alive. She's still with them. This is now how many years? 64, 36, 23, 59 years? Oh shoot, next year is their diamond anniversary. She's been with them almost 60 years. Now, I asked the question because a young married couple taking on the additional responsibility of feeding an adult, of when you're traveling or going out, having to make sure that they either come with you or arrangements are put in place for them. Those are heavy, heavy obligations that people take. And I've just come out of a press conference with the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for People Empowerment and the Minister for Innovation and Science and Technology with Barb, urging Barbadians to reflect in their hearts and to recognize that the measure of a society that is functioning well and that is developing and becomes developed is not just about how many buildings we have or what the GDP is or all of the other economic metrics. It is also about what kind of family structure and society and communities we're building. And more often than not, that involves giving back. That is why we were the first to agree to give and reinstate fees for students when Deputy Prime Minister was then Minister of Education with the University of the West Indies and the post-secondary institutions. But what did we say? We're going to pay for you, but there must be Operation Give Back. And that everybody needs to give back a certain amount of hours per year, because while we are paying for you, it means that we don't have the money to put in other things that we might otherwise have considered deserving of public expenditure. And therefore you have to help us carry that load. So that sense of volunteerism, the ability to put the Community Elders Program in place at the National Assistance Board. COVID has come, COVID has gone. We have kept that program going as a major new program because we recognize that when people are actively engaging with senior citizens, the chances of them remaining alert and active are considerably greater than otherwise. And the Minister for People Empowerment can give you the information that they're discovering in their work with them. We're doing these things because the kind of society that we develop and nurture matters, and the kind of values that we pass on matters. When we go to a funeral, nobody don't tell you about somebody's bank account. They tell you about what kind of person they were, what they did, how they treated other people. And I want to urge Barbadians to develop a culture even now of covenanting, to give money on an annual basis to these associations. Everybody has their pet one, whether it is the Barbados Autism Association, the Barbados Alzheimer's Association, the Cancer Society, the Heart Foundation, the Barbados Diabetes Association. All of these entities need support. And secondly, for some of us, we don't necessarily like to talk about death, but planning out our affairs, you may want to leave the majority of your estate for your family, but leave a little something for a cause which you strongly supported and believe will help ease the burden of others in this country. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It is not by accident that the elder from St. Peter, and I call him the elder from St. Peter not because of his age, but because of his locus standi in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, has also ended his speech with the same words. And I really do believe that it is consistent with what got our great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents through difficult times. I grew up learning in the city about the share pot. Today I got, I give with you. Tomorrow you got, you share with me. You know? And the reality is, it is that spirit that built the resilience that got us through this country. With respect to the identification and support for autism within the educational system and for other learning disabilities, as recent as last night in meetings with the Ministry of Education, I indicated that the government will continue to support and expand support for testing, particularly for those families whose income does not allow them to be able to get the testing, the diagnostic testing and support that they need in this country. And the truth is that the earlier we put these things in place, the better it is for the children, the better it is for the family. And I think that there are experiences that all of us know, because those who are autistic are exceptionally brilliant. In fact, I would venture to suggest that most major discoveries in the world were probably as a result of people who may be autistic or on the spectrum somewhere, because the Lord finds a way of blessing us in ways to compensate for the other things that have happened. And therefore, I hope and pray that the sensitization and public education that we need from our schools to our communities to our places of employment can be put in place. And I'm using my office as well as the work and policies of this government to reinforce the message that when we say that each one matters and that we care, that we mean it. We may not always be able to give you everything that you need, just like a parent is not always be able to give you the gift that you want at Christmas or the gift that you need at your birthday, but we will love you, we will work with you, we will take care of you, and we will hopefully reinvigorate an ethos that was part of our community to look out for each other and to treat each other as we deserve to be treated and as we would like to be treated. If we can do these things, then I believe that this will be a better society. I've also asked that the Ministry of Public Works looks at the accessibility in the major towns, particularly the sidewalk and the public buildings. Those are things coming out of the Hinkson report, I believe, as well. And when we bring the settled policy for consultation here, and then the final policy, we hope that we will see the improvements in these areas. But I am serving notice that we don't need to wait for all of that to happen to do the obvious things like accessibility, quite frankly, and like increasing the budget periodically for the Ministry of Education to support those parents whose income cannot support the testing of their children with respect to things. The Minister of Education will tell you that only last night, as I said, I raised this issue with them, and I've asked them to present us a framework for how they would want to see the expansion. There are a lot of private providers outside of the ministry who provide these diagnostic services, and not every family is capable of affording it. I say all of these things to be able to reinforce in the public of Barbados why those of us who have been blessed with the ability to work, to earn, to invest, recognize that the government cannot do it alone. And if you have the ability to work, let us work harder and more productive. If you have the ability to invest and grow this economy, work with us to invest and grow this economy. Because what we are doing is not only carrying you along when you succeed, but your ability to make the country grow helps us to help those who cannot help themselves. And this partnership with the provision of the land, as well as the other things we intend to do in partnership with these associations to help us meet our obligations to those who constitute the most vulnerable among us, these are the things that we will make progress on in partnership, but alone would take too long for us to settle and do everything else that we're doing, given the climate crisis, given the other deficits that we inherited with respect to indebtedness, given all of the other things that you hear us talk about so often. So, Mr. Speaker, I take great pleasure. I didn't know whether I would be able to speak because of alternative meetings, but I'm happy that the members in here have seen this debate as an important debate to be able to signal not only how we feel, but to also communicate with the Barbadian public what the government stands for with respect to how it wants to treat the most vulnerable among us and how it wants to build partnerships with other citizens in this nation to achieve noble objectives to make the lives of those who, through no fault of their own, are facing a condition. And secondly, for the parents and guardians and wider family who have had to exercise patience and who have had to give and sacrifice so much, particularly because they're dealing with a developing society that has had to evolve with its services and support systems for people who are either autistic or differently able or disabled, mentally challenged, physically challenged. And we need to see disability differently. We need to see it differently because almost every human being has a disability. It's just that some are more acute than others. And if we start from that premise, then our attitude will be different in all that we do. So I thank the Ministry of Housing. The minister isn't here, but I thank the senior minister for introducing the bill. And I thank all members who spoke today in reinforcing the message that this is not just about government policy or what government wants to do. This is about changing the ethos of a nation to ensure that we go back to taking care of each other and to reject the individualism and the consumerism that has caused us to remain blinkered rather than being all-embracing in the share pot mentality into which I was born in the city and St. Michael. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, I beg to move the suspension of the House until Friday, the 22nd of September.
You want to suspend for further consideration.
Sorry. Right. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the House be suspended, that this bill be, resolution be, that we suspend
For further consideration of this resolution.
that we suspend for further consideration of the resolution.
Honourable member for Antulain? Prater? The question is that this resolution be suspended for further consideration. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This resolution is suspended for further consideration.
No, he.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I therefore beg to move the suspension of the House until Friday, the 22nd of September at 10 a.m. to continue the debate. So it's a suspension. We're continuing the debate. So
You
it's
can
a
adjourn. You're already suspended for further consideration of the bill, so you would. So the resolution.
to adjourn.
The House will be adjourned until
Mr.
Friday.
Speaker, I beg to move the adjournment of the House until Friday, the 22nd of September at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honourable chairman be suspended until Friday, the 22nd of September at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honourable chairman stands adjourned until Friday, the 22nd day of September at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.